Welcome to Legacy Conversations, a channel where we preserve military memories and history.
Hello, Internet. I'm excited. We have some old friends back here, partly to answer questions on previous episodes and partly also to explain new things to us. Yes, it's a men of artillery, and I'm very happy that they are back here. The first one is going to talk to us is Major General Koos Bom Lobsher. Sir, you are very welcome here. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you. And welcome to the show once again. I wonder if I can ask you just to give the viewer, because there might be somebody here who haven't seen the previous episodes, and if you haven't, please go and have a look at them. You will be surprised on what you find out. Just give us a brief background on your military career, and then we'll go to the topic.
Koos, thank you again for this opportunity. If you will allow me, I'm not going to respond immediately by telling your audience more about my military career, because that will unfold as I go on with what I want to share with you today. I would like to begin at the end of my 9 months of national service in 1964. You might remember in those days, not everybody was compelled to do military service. You were selected in one or other way, or you were ignored. But I was one of the people who was selected. Now, at the end of my 9 months of national service in 1964, as an assistant field cornet, in those days, that was the name for a second lieutenant, I was selected by a South African Army Headquarters Selection Board for a 3-year BSc degree study at the Military Academy, which at that time and still today was situated at Saldanha down in the Western Cape. The Academy was technically an extension of the Faculty of Military Science of the University of Stellenbosch. My subjects were mathematics, geography, physics, and chemistry. My lecturers were excellent, but to my discontent, without being vociferous, the study material was too academical in nature, and the applicability thereof in a military environment thus questionable. But I kept my thoughts about these matters to myself. Now, during the said 3 years at the Academy, all Army members of my group were ranked as candidate officers and assigned to the infantry. In our first year, that was 1965, during a holiday break in early January, we were assigned to a military outfit, for want of a better word, an outfit, on the premises of what evolved into the traditional School of Artillery. That evolvement happened later. Now, at that early stage, we as a course had to attend to a course in vehicle driving and maintenance, as well as a course in the handling and use of explosives. Now, whether a School of Artillery existed in the Army at that point in time on those premises, I am not knowledgeable about. Now, in my third year at the Academy, that was my last year there, during a coffee break one morning, a visitor from up north, an Army Colonel, Colonel Constant Viljoen, whose appointment in the Army at that stage was unknown to me. But he also enjoyed coffee with us, during which he called me aside and asked me what I intended to do after graduation. I responded by mentioning that I have picked up a rumor about a possible establishment of reconnaissance capability in the Army, the so-called later recce's, and that I would like to be part of that. His immediate reaction was, forget about that. We need you in the artillery. So that was the beginning and the end of my possible reconnaissance tour of duty. Right. What I did not know at that stage, that is the morning when you called me and told me to forget about the wreckage. So what I did not know at that stage was that he was also an artilleryman. That is a gunner in common parlance. So at the end of my academic tour in early January 1968, I reported at the School of Artillery for my first artillery course, actually my first artillery training as well. Now at that stage, the core school about which we are going to talk today was then freshly situated or established on the premises that we had to do the two courses that I've mentioned to you, which actually had nothing to do with artillery. But I also observed that the instructors of those two courses, they were not there any longer, and for one or other, in one or other way, the premises were what is the word now? Were composed as the School of Artillery, which I regard as the old school artillery or the traditional School of Artillery. Just to make a distinction between that School of Artillery and the later School of Artillery at Klipdrift, which Perry has probably already mentioned to you. So at that stage, I did not know nor whether there had ever existed a School of Artillery elsewhere. Maybe I should delve up more of the history of the school. Okay, to my astonishment, I then also re-met Colonel Viljoen, the guy who told me, forget about the wreckage. So I re-met him there, being the commander of the school. And it is my pleasure to share with everybody that from the onset, I experienced him as a man of action, as a dynamic officer, physically fit and in good shape, and very important, with impeccable integrity and honesty. His eventual appointments as Chief of the Army and ultimately Chief of the South African Defence Force were thus predictable. Shortly after my arrival at the unit, he was then transferred to a post at Army Headquarters. But before that, on occasion, I heard him saying the following. First of all, good discipline and good morale are not achieved through the neck of a bottle. He also said, the choice to use alcohol is yours, but then always ensure that you remain sober and in control of yourself, as well as in control of the environment around you. Also, if you have to walk from point A to point B, always walk briskly. Now, in lighter vein, due to that, he had the applicable nickname of stofstreepie. In English, a dusty trail. He also said, all that the commander needs in his office in order to be efficient is a table, a chair, and a telephone. Of course, nowadays, that would not apply just like that, because we have got new technology. But in those days, it made sense to me, a table, a chair, and a telephone. I immediately found very excited and comfortable about the new road that awaited me at the school. but of course, oblivious to what the future had in store for me. And today, in retrospect, my members, colleagues, friends, subordinates, and all who traveled a very unique path with me shared unique events in my career and my life as a gunner and beyond. We all had deep roots in our acquaintance with the said school. Now I would like to go over to the organization and the functioning of the traditional School of Artillery as I have experienced it over a period of nearly 9 years of my life. First of all, the school was commanded by a colonel and assisted by a civilian secretary. Then we had a number of wings, training wings. I would like to start with the gunnery wing, which was the senior wing of amongst all those wings. So there was a gunnery wing with a major as chief instructor, assisted by a team of officer instructors of lower rank, and also a wing sergeant major or a wing instructor. Then there was a so-called locating wing with the personnel-wise similarly structured. Now, just a little bit of explanation on the term locating. That wing kept themselves busy with teaching how to use a radar, how to use sound ranging for purposes of detecting enemy fire and or the source of such a fire. Then also the production of data, meteorological data, which played a big role in accurate artillery firing. So they were called the locating wing. Then there was a junior leader training wing. In most cases, training junior permanent force people who just joined the army and joined the corps, as well as national servicemen selected junior people. That wing was similarly structured, but during my tenure as school commander, I restructured that specific wing into a medium battery with the chief instructor as battery commander. Then we had a research and development wing with a major in charge, a guy called Toon Greef. Then we also had a small library with a civilian lady as librarian. We had a regimental sergeant major, or normally called the RSM, and then also important, a unit chaplain, and then at least one typist, normally a civilian lady per wing. Now, in the absence of the school commander at times, for whatever reasons, the most senior chief instructor available would act as unit commander. Then you might find this one strange, but they played a very good role in as far as motivation and morale was concerned. We also had a unit for the unit, an Army Ladies Association, which was chaired by the school commander's wife. And during my 4 years as the school commander, of course, my wife. Then we had 4 lecture rooms to our disposal. And lastly, we also had a hall with a film projection booth. Going back to the technology of those days, from time to time, we used training films. So, as far as the organization and the functioning of the traditional School of Artillery, I have now shared all that with you. Then I would like to share with you the unit from a support services perspective. Firstly, we had adequate bungalows for students with good ablution facilities. We had a quartermaster store. We had a transport park. We had a gun park. Funny word, a transport park is normally something in the open, but a gun park is where the guns were kept undercover in large hangars for obvious reasons. Then we also had a signals section, Sergeant Major plus one other NCO who participated in signals training, use of radios, etc., laying cable in those days also. Then also a light workshop troop, the vehicle mechanics, normally referred to as the TIFFs. And then, as in about all units in the army, we had a mess with a canteen. Then at the unit entrance, we had a duty room / guardhouse. And then, just to note, the unit had no sport facilities, although we participated in sport, and everybody was granted the opportunity for participation in sport. But there we had to make use of facilities as provided by the sports section of the headquarters of Northwestern Command. Lastly, from a support services perspective, we also had a small first aid station, because in artillery training, handling ammunition, handling heavy guns, and so on. One always had you ran the risk of getting small type of injuries. Now, we come to the most important of what I would like to share with you today, namely the role of the unit. Firstly, to provide high-quality artillery technical and tactical training, know-how and knowledge to all students. Secondly, and this was extremely important to me, to cultivate high-quality artillery as well as general military leadership skills at all levels. Thirdly, to conduct research into artillery-related issues, including international artillery-related developments, tendencies, and issues. In the fourth place, to collect and analyze artillery-related tactical and/or relevant lessons learned during training as well as during operations where our artillery were involved, and to disseminate the results to all interested and affected, including, when applicable, also to our armaments society. Fifthly, the school's role was to produce and disseminate artillery operating / training manuals / software as, when, and where needed. Number 6, when requested by higher command to render appropriate extra personnel for especially operational deployment to heed such support. Number 7, to create and enforce obligatory safety procedures and prescriptions applicable to artillery training and the handling of ammunition, ordnance, vehicles, and all items of artillery equipment. Number 8, to support in whatever format required our armaments industry in the development of artillery-related equipment and ammunition. Number 9, to create, update when necessary, and be the guardian of applicable artillery tactics and doctrine. 10, to be the guardian of those time-honored artillery traditions still applicable to the present day. 11, if possible, to support all artillery-related ceremonial occasions where and when requested. 12, to cultivate and be the torchbearer of a high-quality standard of functional instead of display discipline in the artillery corps. And then lastly, but in my mind, the most important, namely, to cultivate emotional, spiritual, physical, and intellectual resilience amongst all gunners. I want to repeat this last one because I think we have succeeded to a great extent to accomplish this, and this also underpinned the quality of artillery performance during the war in Angola. So I repeat, to cultivate emotional, spiritual, physical, and intellectual resilience amongst all gunners. In Afrikaans, veerkragtigheid, which all has to do with the mind, all these things that I have now mentioned. So, of course, I hope I have given you a good indication of the extended role of the unit in comparison with what people simply normally would say the role of the unit is do training. Training was only one of the many things we had to work with there and to do. Then on a most or more relaxed way, I would like to share with you some big word anecdotes, which means strong of interesting or funny events. There were many of them. I've listed some of them. I will run through them. When I assumed command of the school on a Monday morning of that year, by Friday, 5 days later, the chief of the army phoned me, General Gelnys at that stage. And he said to me, congratulations with your appointment as the commander of the school and your new rank as a colonel, full colonel. But I would like to inform you about something about in one of your bungalows. So I listened. And what he told me was in a certain bungalow at the one of the wings, the training wings, PWD, Public Works Department, or one of their contractors, very recently installed new electrical lighting in a bungalow. And then afterwards, another contractor appeared on the scene, and he put up a new ceiling underneath the lighting, so that that bungalow was left in darkness. I thought, it was very funny to be taught or informed about this by the chief of the army. So, with all due respect, I said to myself, is this guy playing games with me? Is it the type of showmanship that he's exposing now? I didn't react on that. I just said to him, thank you, I don't know about it. As you, the General Chief of the Army, know, I've only started with my posting here, but I will do an inspection and I'll take the necessary action, which I did. Then a very, very interesting thing. When I was the chief instructor at the gunnery wing, one Sunday evening, I got into my car and I drove to the unit to fetch some documents that I needed that evening for preparation for something. But when I got to the office, I found that it was about 8 o'clock that evening, on a Sunday evening. When I got to my office, got out of my car, I noticed that the front door was not locked. So I switched on. And remember, those were before the days of, criminality and all the bloody rubbish that we have to live with today. So I walked down the passage to my office, and then I heard something falling on the floor. First of all, I thought, well, maybe it's a bird. We all had birds there. or maybe a mouse or something, but I was wide awake. Getting to my office door, the door was a little bit ajar. And I normally pulled the door close to when I left my office. So I said to myself, something is wrong here. And I put my hand, I was still standing outside in the passage, but I put my hand into the office and I switched on the light because the office was also in the dark. And I stepped into my office, and there to my to my surprise, 2 National Force students, young guys, previous year still in matric, they were sitting in my office. And one of them was sitting in my chair with my desk in front of him, and the other guy was sitting on another chair. But the guy sitting behind my desk, he had a telephone in his hand. And you can imagine their reaction when I caught them red-handed with whatever they were busy with. So, you know, sweat pouring out of their brims, heavy breathing. And I said to them, what the hell are you doing here? They couldn't even talk. And I said to them, calm down, calm down, calm down. Tell me, what are you doing here? No, we are phoning our parents. I said, okay, that's interesting. I said, but calm down. Enjoy yourself. I'm going to make coffee for all of us. Would you like to have coffee? I said, yes, please. So I went back to, we had a little coffee room there with an urn and so on. So I made 3 cups of coffee in a, a skimboard tray. In a tray. I went back to the office and I said to them, okay, there's your coffee. Enjoy yourself. And calm down, man, calm down. Well, which they couldn't do, but we drank our coffee. And then I said to them, okay, now I'm going to stay here until I'm finished with you guys. Now you phone your parents while I'm here and tell them what you have done and tell them I'm still here and tell them I've offered you coffee. So I sat back and I relaxed and I listened to these 2 guys talking to their parents. But I could also hear the reaction of their parents on the other side. And then I talked to the parents and I said to them, calm down, don't worry, I'm not going to take any punishment or punitive measures against your sons. I've also been young in my life and I'm still young. I understand it. So relax. And I said to the 2 guys, okay, you've now heard me talking to your parents. You can sort out anything with them afterwards in your own time somewhere else. Now, to cut a long story short, at the end of the course, these 2 guys performed brilliantly. They passed their course and we promoted them to 2nd lieutenant. Yeah, I will never forget that. But, you know, I had no reasons to be rough and tough with them. I mean, I could have ended their careers right there if I were like that. Right. Then on our long gunnery course, when I arrived at the School of Artillery, I've done a couple of courses. And one of these courses was called a long gunnery course. It was actually a course that were conducted in Great Britain for their gunners. But we had an officer later, in his career, General van der Berg, Frans van der Berg, when he was a young officer, he attended this long gunnery course in England. So when he got back, he installed the idea of a long gunnery course in our course school as well. So I attended such a course, and we had brilliant lecturers there, visiting lecturers. I think it was about a 4 or 5 months long course, really intensive. And on a given Friday, our course leader, Colonel Lombard, Major Lombard at that stage, he always had a very funny expression on his face, as if he would like to tell you something that you do not know about, but he did know about it. So he, assisted by somebody else, all of a sudden he blindfolded all of us with things around our eyes, and by the hand, because we couldn't see any longer, by the hand, he led each one of us into an adjacent room, and he locked the door behind us. You could hear him locking, and there we were standing, all of us blindfolded. That was about 2 o'clock that afternoon. And then he said to us, okay, remove the blindfolds. And there in the middle of this room stood an Italian howitzer, a mountain howitzer, pack howitzer, made by a company called Otto Melara, and this was a 105 millimeter gun. Now, the Italians had this gun should they ever had to operate in high mountains, the Alps and so on, where it would be not possible to get bigger guns there, impossible to get there with vehicles. So they designed this gun which you could take apart in all its parts and carry it by manpack or by donkeys or whatever. So what we saw there on the floor was about 200 different pieces. And our task then was to get this gun, to put it together again. And then he went out and he locked the door. And the windows were also blanketed. And for the rest of that day and for the rest of that night, we struggled with this Otto Melara gun. Certain of the components was easily to identify, for example, the barrel or the wheels or whatever. But then there were a lot of other. So the next morning, the door was opened and the major came in and he just looked at us. Yes, I think he expected we would not be able to do that. And then he and our chief, not the instructor, our chief, the guy who did the research and development for us, a guy called Toon Greef, they too then demonstrated to us how to put this gun together, which they did in next to no time about. We were flabbergasted. So now the history behind that gun. In those days, the Rhodesians, they had their own war with terrorists. And in one way or the other, more than one of these guns were shipped and then moved by train via the RSA to Rhodesia to get to fall into these guys' hands. And in under one way or the other, I've never heard the whole story. It never happened like that. Either somebody had good intelligence or what, police, our police, secret service, these guns were captured, and one of them then landed here at our School of Artillery. And that was the one that we were confronted with on that day. Later on, I got another role for this gun because we couldn't use this gun. We did not even have ammunition for that. well, ammunition in the form of projectiles, but we had ammunition in the form of cartridge cases. So at the leader group training wing, or the medium battery, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, at that stage the commander was a guy called Tiens Kutsia. I called Tiens and I said to him, listen, one of these days we will have our passing out parade for your students. Let us use this gun at the passing out parade. But of course, apart from the cartridge cases, we did not have ammunition. And the passing out parade would take place where there was a stadium with a huge ground, the parade ground. And then we started doing some experiments with this gun in secret, of course, only between me and Tiens Kutsia. And I think he also had an assistant, but in secret and out of the unit, we started developing our own projectiles in the form of rolls of toilet paper. And we made a couple of test firings. Impressive. The moment that toilet roll left the barrel, it disintegrates into thousands of pieces of paper. So, on the day of the passing out parade, with all the parents coming from all over South Africa, sitting there in their hundreds, nearly, we had a fictitious river marked out in front of them with white chalk. And then part of the day then was the use of this howitzer. And we had a team, gun crew, very, very, very well trained to do exactly that. So the gun was off hooked from the tractor, and then by hand. Remember, this is a man handlebare, man-held type of gun. In the direction of the parents, the crew ran with the gun, and then they came to the river, which is an obstacle. And of course, to get through the obstacle, they had to dismantle the gun in all its pieces, which also happened there within minutes. And piece for piece, the course carried the gun through the river and reassembled it on the other side. And then they fired around with all these glittering, toilet paper glittering right into the audience. That was a huge success. I will never forget that. Then on a more serious note, when I arrived in the artillery and I started looking at training manuals and so on, I realized that what is being preached there is nothing else than British doctrine. Role of the artillery, it's a lot of doctrine. And even as a young artillery officer with very, very few experience, very little experience, I said to myself, I don't buy this. Because the artillery has got the biggest firepower in the army. And now I must read that we are subjugated to supporting instead of attacking. And I started talking about that, but some of the seniors, they picked up my displeasure, and one of them, I won't mention his name today. He was a major at that stage. He told me he's not happy with me because he discovered me as a rebel, and he also called me a young Turk. Actually, I thought he was flattering me, but that was not his posture. So, but I never got away from from my intention in the long run to change the artillery into an attacking weapon with all the firepower that we had. Now that's another story for another day. But in the long term, I succeeded in changing this outdated doctrine. Then at the School of Artillery, we also had 6 sexton tracked mobile guns. Now the sexton was actually a gun that was made, the undercarriage was made by the Americans in the Second World War. The Sherman tank, you had a Sherman tank engine and the underpart, and then on top of that was mounted a 25-pounder gun of British origin. So it was a sort of a mixture. Now, the funny thing here is the English or the Brits, they also use this equipment in this configuration, and they called it the Abbott. Now, funny enough, that for one other reason, the British were very fond of using names of religious people. Here they had the Abbott. They also had, there were 2 others that I can remember. Abbott. Oh, my mother. I will get back to that. But these 6 Abbotts were never used. They just stood there. And then at the stage we had a unit commander by the name of Colonel Frans van der Berg. He is also the guy who did the long gunnery course in England. He wanted us to start training on this equipment again, and he also still lived in the days of the British doctrine. Therefore, I heard him saying, we must get the Abbotts to run with the tanks, which I thought was crazy. But I mean, I was young and he was unit commander, so I did not really oppose him. But I let him know I don't buy that mobility. We haven't got mobility. So on one day we got one of those 6 sections to drive with. After about 100 meters, it broke down. And that was the end of the sections. So back to the other 5, and those 6 sections remained there for a very long period. And then you might remember that I think at the end of the 68, 69, 70, somewhere there, we had a national fuel shortage in the country. And then we were only allowed to buy fuel until 6 o'clock in the evening, and then all the fuel points had to be closed nationwide. So fuel became an issue, especially for these young guys on a weekend when they should get a weekend pass to go home. Some of them had vehicles, but nobody had fuel. But one Sunday evening, they tried to siphon petrol out of one of these sextons. And I don't know exactly what happened there. Somebody maybe used a match, and this sexton went up in flames, burnt out completely. Of course, the culprits, they made a quick getaway. Until today, we never discovered who actually did it. But that sexton that went up in flames, in one way or the other, actually killed this whole idea of using the sextons to run with tanks. Yeah. Then I would like to share something with you. When I arrived at the School of Artillery in January 1968, my first stint with the artillery, the then chief instructor gunnery, guy with the name of Major Paul Lombard, he handed me this book. As you can see, Artillery Basic Mathematics. Sorry. Artillery Basic Mathematics. Now, on opening this book, this was in Afrikaans, but I will try to do this in English. With pleasure, I welcome you on your first course at the School of Artillery. You now start your artillery career, and in time to come, you will come back on more than one occasion to this school for further training. I give you this book so that on a regular basis you can work out of this book, and therefore never to forget the basic knowledge that is required from a fine artillery man. I wish you a successful career and hope you will grow into a competent and a wide awake, and hope that you will become a good and wide awake gunner. Signed 2 January 1968. Now, the reason why I'm showing this to you this morning is just to give you an indication of the quality of leaders that we had and the quality of instructors that we had. I will never part with this, and from time to time I reread these good words. Then another very interesting one I would also like to share with you. When I was on staff course, we had a stint of duty somewhere in the north of Southwest Africa at that stage. We as a course, we had to go there and do some training there. But at that point in time, my wife was expecting one child. And then the school commander, Colonel van der Berg, he called me to his office and he said to me, I'm going to establish a telephone connection between my house and your house. Our two houses were about 200 meters apart. To enable your wife, if the time comes for her to give birth and there's a problem, to call me and my wife, and then we will look after her, take her to hospital, etc., etc. Now, it never happened like that, but I mentioned this just to give you an idea of the type of leadership that we had in that unit, the quality of people. Then something that many people under my command, now I'm talking about my command as the unit commander, later on as a colonel, something not many people liked. I was fond on a Friday afternoon to make it my afternoon. So I had the whole unit in front of me, and then we started running around the airfield, about 5 kilometers, to get fit and to stay fit. But not running, only running with 25-pounder guns, which is a horse of a different color. Now, not many of them enjoyed it. It was really tough. You know, it was a ground, what's it name? A gravel road with a lot of potholes and so on. So it was really tough. And that became sort of the rule in that unit on a Friday afternoon. On other days, I would take everybody. Of course, I did all these things with the people. On another day, I might have taken everybody out on the Ventersdorp Road or any other road, about 20 kilometers. And with all your kit, you had to run back to the unit. So I was not very popular, but I was serious about quality of fitness. Then another thing that I also instituted was to replace display discipline with functional discipline. I had no inkling to expect from people to make their beds square for inspection and that type of stuff. That was a waste of time and a waste of effort and everything that went with that. So I started instilling focus on another approach to discipline, namely functional discipline. Then on a very sad note, when I talked about the composition of the unit, I mentioned the section that did research and development under the control of Major Toon Greef. It happened on a Friday afternoon that I went to his office. First of all, I called him to make sure he is there, and I said to him, Toon, I just want to share something with you. And I walked to his office, and when I got there, the door was closed, which I found strange. I mean, he knew I was coming, and I was his superior in rank. And I knocked on the door. Nothing happened. And then I turned the knob, and I tried to open the door, but I couldn't open the door. Something was blocking the door. And then I had to use force, and eventually I got the door sort of half open, just to find him lying against the door. Then I understood why I couldn't open the door. And I touched him, and I discovered that this guy has just died. It was, you know, if I think back, I get very emotional still after all these years, because he was a very efficient officer. That's why he was responsible for research and development. And then I had the heavy task of informing his wife. That was very, very sad experience. On another Friday, funny enough, how many of these things happened on a Friday? While I was still the chief instructor gunnery, this same Paul Lombard, the author of this, one afternoon about 3 o'clock, he said to me, I must get into my car and go over to the shooting range where Quartermaster General normally did his ammunition proofing. There was an accident, and I must go and investigate that accident. When I arrived there, I looked at this gun with a barrel premature. The barrel blown apart, and what remained of the barrel was lying on the ground. But more serious, human remains scattered all over the gun, everything there. Froth, white froth from the one of the systems on the gun, the recoil system, mixed with blood. It was a gruesome scenario. And I immediately said to myself, this must have been an ammunition failure. And then all of a sudden, a policeman arrived there from the local police station, a sergeant, and he was quite cocky. When he saw me, he said to me, get away, man, get away. You've got nothing to do here. And then I got cocky and I said to him, listen, somebody was killed here. Can you see what happened here? And I've got an order to inspect and to try and get an idea what happened here. You're not in position to tell me to leave. I think you should leave. Yeah, so then he left. Ek het hom amper gebliksem. You know, I get tears in my eyes if I think about what happened on that day. Later in my career, I also had to do 2 other similar investigations, but I won't talk about them today. We will remain to School of Artillery and what happened there. Then in a lighter moment, going back to the old equipment that we had to use as locating equipment for radar, you know, the radar and the MET and so on. The radar equipment that we had, they were called Green Archers, also imported from Great Britain, the Green Archers. So we had a couple of Green Archers, and it was decided by the Chief of the Army to scrap them because we never had any result with them. And part of the scrapping was for the signalers to remove the, I don't know what you call that tube, one or other electronic tube, but it was a fairly big tube with a screen, a glass screen. Quite a number of them, I think about 24 of them or so. And I made an arrangement with the signalers. I said to them, now, what are you going to do with these tubes now? No, they will discard them. I said, okay, I'm interested in them. So I got all 24 tubes under my control. And then also on a Friday afternoon, I invited my senior personnel to join me on the shooting range at Dirkie Ice. And everybody must bring his rifle with. And there we sat on the 100-meter mark, and we enjoyed ourselves by destroying these 24 tubes. They were the targets. And it was quite spectacular. You know, the bullet hit the tube, it sort of explodes into millions of pieces of glass. So that is how we disposed of all these parts on that afternoon. And then this one is quite scary. When I was the commander of the unit, I got a message one day that the Chief of the Army's evaluation team will visit my unit to evaluate the quality of the School of Artillery. I had no problem with that. And then on a good morning, this team arrived with a colonel in charge and 3 or 4 lieutenant colonels. So that constituted the team. So I welcomed them and invited them to my office where I had coffee ready for them. And while we were drinking the coffee, I realized, or I noticed they were not really interested in the coffee as such. You know, they were studying the walls of my office. And I said to myself, switch on. And then the colonel started speaking. He said to me, why are your walls, your office walls, why are they so empty? I said, well, I haven't got a problem with that. That is my style. I've got other sources of inspiration. And then they started asking me the following question. Can you show us your record of, let us say, for example, AWOL? I said to them, no, I don't keep such a record. The personnel section would be able to give you that answer. Show us your record of students that failed courses. And so they went on. And I remain telling them I'm not keeping such records. And then all of a sudden they put down their cups and saucers and they got out of their chairs, and the colonel said to me, no, first of all, he looked at his team and he said to them, let's go back and report to the chief of the army that it is impossible to evaluate this unit. No, I didn't like that, but I didn't react either because I'm switched on. And I said to him, okay, I'm fine with that, but just do me one favor. And I put an exclamation mark on that. One favor. When you report back to the chief of the army, please tell him that you did not ask me the most important question that you should have asked me. And then the colonel said to me, now, what would that question be? And I said to him, you did not ask me how involved I was with the training and the main role of this unit. And then they went back to Pretoria. Now, this was about 40 years ago. I'm still awaiting any reaction, either from them or from the chief of the army. Oh, I will never forget that. Then the last anecdote that I would like to share with you, there are many more, but I think I'm going to stop here. At one other stage, the Defence Force climbed on the bandwagon of occupational safety and economizing. So to put that into practice, every unit was assigned somebody with occupational safety and economizing experience and knowledge. And so one of them, a civilian from a mine in Klerksdorp, he was assigned to the School of Artillery. So now on a good day, this guy now reported to me, I met him, introduced it to me, etc., etc. And then I said to him, okay, when are you going to start with your evaluation of our occupational safety and economizing? And then he got lost in the unit for about a day and came back to me with some of the results. The first one he reported to me was in the transport park. They detected that many of the tires did not really, different tires, different sizes on the same vehicle, which is obviously not acceptable. It's dangerous and so on. said, yeah, I know about that. But those are the only tires that we could get our hands on. So calm down. In any case, we don't drive at high speed with those heavy vehicles. And then the other one, he asked me whether I, as a commander, keep a record of the use of ladders. And I said to him, yeah, explain. He said to me, no, you as a commander should have a record of every ladder in the unit in terms of how many steps were taken on every ladder over a period of time. And then they also discovered at the kitchen down outside, you know, where the trash was poured into a drum. They opened the lid, and there they found 4 half-used, half-eaten loaves of bread, which they considered as a huge failure, economically wise. And then I said to him, listen, man, I can now take you with me to the shooting range with, for example, a mobile rocket launcher, and in 40 seconds, we can fire about 20 million rounds worth of ammunition. And now you want to castigate me about vrotbrode. Go away, man. Ga net weg. I never saw them again. Yeah, really. Okay. This was made life very, very impossible. Interesting. Okay, now I would like to move to the end of my my stint. I want to talk about the role of the unit. When I assumed command of the unit, I checked everything that I inherited from my predecessor, opening files, opening drawers, seeing what is inside. And in one drawer, I found a document, a single-page document called The Role of the School of Artillery. A one-sentence role. And I will never forget the words, to train instructors. I was flabbergasted. I nearly fall off my chair, because that was not my idea of the role of the school, to produce instructors. And I immediately made a decision. I'm going to change the role of the school. In one sentence, to produce leaders for the artillery corps. And I called my superior in Army headquarters, the so-called director of artillery, Chris Venter, and I said to him, Chris, take note. I've made this decision. And he said to me, okay. Now, to put more flesh onto this, and this is where I will stop. The role of the unit. Firstly, to provide high-quality artillery, technical and tactical training, know-how, and knowledge to all students. 2, to cultivate high-quality artillery and general military leadership skills at all levels. The issue of quality of leadership was paramount in my head, and it is still like that today. Thirdly, to conduct research into artillery-related issues, including international artillery-related developments, tendencies, and issues. Fourth, to collect and analyze artillery-related tactical and or other relevant lessons learned during training, as well as during operations where our artillery were involved, and to disseminate the results to all interested and affected including when applicable also to our armaments industry. 5. To produce and disseminate artillery operating training manuals / software as, when and where needed. 6. When requested by higher command, to render appropriate extra personnel for especially operational deployment to heed such support. 7. To create and enforce obligatory safety procedures and prescriptions applicable to artillery training and the handling of ordnance, ammunition, vehicles, and all items of equipment. Number 8. To support in whatever format required our armaments industry in the development of artillery-related equipment and ammunition. 9. To create, update when necessary, and be the guardian of applicable artillery tactics and doctrine. 10. To be the guardian of those time-honored artillery traditions still applicable to the present day. Just to give you one example of a time-honored tradition. 2. Actually 2. The first one is to view the gun or the rocket launcher not as a weapon, but as our color, our traditional color, ceremonial color, which inter alia means that is the message of a color. It means we will never allow any one of our pieces of equipment to fall into enemy hands. That is the emotion behind this color. So to come back, to be the guardian of those time-honored artillery traditions, this is one of them, still applicable to the present day. 11, I think I've done this, if possible, to support all artillery-related ceremonial occasions where and when requested. 12, to cultivate and be the torchbearer of a high-quality standard of functional instead of display discipline in the artillery corps. And then the last one, and this is the most important one, to cultivate emotional, spiritual, physical, and intellectual resilience, in Afrikaans, veerkragtigheid, amongst all gunners. If I can repeat this in Afrikaans, om emosionele, spirituele, fisiese en intellektuele veerkragtigheid onder alle kanoniere te kweek. This has to do with the mind. All these things. Veerkragtig. That was my contribution. Then I would like to end with this. I call it rules to be happy for the gunner. There are 11 of them. Firstly, free your heart from hatred. 2, free your mind from troubles. 3, live simply and within your means. 4, give more. 5, expect less. 6, work hard. 7, always be honest with yourself and in dealing with others. 8, the shortest route between 2 points is a straight line. Therefore, live your life on a straight line. 9, keep physically fit. It could save your life. Also understand that a healthy mind only lives in a healthy body. 10, never follow the crowd. Let me stop here for a moment. talking about the crowd. I'll come back to the rest of this one. I once did a course at the Army College, unit commander's course. And on a specific day, we had a lecturer there, a major. I was a captain at that stage. We had an infantry major there who talked about how to attack an enemy. And he made the statement that before attacking an enemy, make sure you've got at least a 3-to-1 advantage, manpower-wise, over that enemy. And at the end of his lecture, he asked, the normal question, are there any reaction? I put up my hand and I said to him, I'm not very comfortable with this 3-to-1 advantage. I said to him, there should be more. We should know the nature of the enemy, the quality of the leadership there, the quality of their training, the quality of their experience, the quality of their equipment. And then this major, he got angry and he pointed his finger at me and he said to me in Afrikaans, weet jy wat is jou probleem in die lewe? Do you know what your problem is in life? With a very loud voice. And then I got cocky as well. And in a not so loud, but louder than normal, in a loud voice, I said to him, nee meneer, ek weet nie wat is my probleem in die lewe nie. No, Major, I do not know what my problem is in life. And he said to me, jou probleem is, jy dink te veel. What a compliment. What a compliment. Okay. Let me just finish here. Point number 10 was never follow the crowd, thereby risking to become yet another useless idiot. Because only dead fish flow downstream. And never forget, the American brothers Neville and Orville Wright, who invented the aircraft in 1904, they were the only two people on Earth who did not know that it was totally impossible for any machine heavier than air ever to fly. The rest of the world knew nothing heavier than air will ever fly, excepting these two guys. Then the last rule that I have jotted down here, believe in God and trust Him. God will look after those who look after themselves. Good, dankie.
Well, welcome here. You know, guys, we've been doing this for almost 5 years and we have millions of views and more than $1 million of views. And we're really hurting our enemies because they don't like our message to come out, which is why we're so suppressed. So just a quick reminder, if you like the video, please think about it. Buy me a rooibos tea. But you actually click on it as buy me a coffee. It is quite standard right across YouTube and everywhere else.
We just added it. It's a new support,
method.
a new method of support, which is greatly appreciated.
Yes, and it is still the same as you still have Patreon, of course, and we will still ask you to read my books and the books we wrote together because it's really, really good. This is Rebecca, by the way, if you don't know, it's my lovely wife. She's the driving force behind Legacy because there were times when I wanted to give up and there were lots of frustrations, especially with her.
Even in filling out the Buy Me a Coffee form.
Man, that's true. I've got a South African attitude against red tape. You know, you were standing in the queues where at television things, you do get angry quite quickly. I think I won't get it out of me. But guys, to be honest, it's not only me making these videos. Sometimes Fossey and the rest would also contribute. And if they don't contribute in making the video, Fossey especially is doing a lot of editing in the background. So we're going to put in also a specific link where another presenter was involved, where you buy him or her a coffee, and not me, because I think it's just the right thing to do.
We're starting out the test phase
Yeah.
now.
See if it works.
So you can buy us a coffee. There is a choice. You can select 1, 2, 3, or more coffees.
Yeah.
It's not coffee.
Or
We don't
rooibos tea.
see. We don't drink coffee. That's why. Believe it or not, that's why rooibos tea is very appreciated.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. And then, yeah, of course, I say this in the thank you message as well, but it is a bit psychological as well. If you keep on doing this and keep on working, keep on spending a lot of money to do it, the trip to us in South Africa to record all the Air Force things has cost 100,000 rand easily. At some stage, you really feel abused, man. You really feel that you need to get something back, even if it's small. It's more about psychological, doing a good job.
And what I see is it motivates him to continue on and get new ideas. And he would like the trip, which is coming up, I think, or might, who knows when you see this, bridge over River Kwai. He was so motivated to do that.
Yeah, we learned a lot, River Kwai. It's a fantastic video. Also include Hellfire Pass, but we also would like to go to Vietnam and look at Khe Sanh and Dien Bien Phu and where the Americans ran away. The CIA headquarters left their files behind. I'll mention that. But even here in Thailand, in Bangkok, we go to Bangkok, we fly to Bangkok, we can spend a day or two and record the Air Force Museum or the other museums that are there. It's history, man. We need support to do it. It's not fair that we carry the burden all by ourselves. I'm not really willing to do that anymore. People can enjoy the videos. You can assist us. Buy us a coffee, man. What does coffee cost? Or rooibos tea? Nothing. Just contribute something and we can keep us going and hurt our enemies even more.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Looking very American right now.
You do?
Yeah, because American girls always wear hats because their hair always looks bad. Like, you don't have to worry about your hair.
Okay. Thank you, sir. This was really fascinating to hear. I have a question for you. It has to do with your Friday afternoon gun crew events. Because as far as I know, a 25-pounder is not a light thing. It's a couple of 1,000 pounds. How many men does it take to drag such a gun around 5 kilos?
6.
Okay, but do they organize themselves or do you have like a...
No, they were trained. That was also the standard crew for a 25-pounder. So they were trained in manhandling. The trade here is manhandling the gun, which inter alia means to move a gun for whatever reason from point A to point B with brute force. On the G2, for example, which is a much heavier gun, the crew was 8. And so also on the G5. As against, for example, 60mm mortar. One man can use a 60mm mortar, for example. So yeah, as I've indicated, the road around the airfield was quite rough and tough. So yeah, but that kept our guys tough and fit and healthy.
Okay, but now I have a bit of a trick question. Once you have this gun running, because I suppose it's fairly flat there, how do you stop that thing from running?
You pull off the handbrake. It had a handbrake. Or you chuck one of your colleagues in front of the wheels.
At what time would you be issued with a gunner's beret, which I understand is blue? Do you have to go through the training first and then you are allowed to wear that beret in public? Or would you be issued from the moment that you arrive at the unit?
At the end of the course, in the case of a course, or at the end of training, because not all training took part in the form of courses. So there is an examination that will be done or should be done, a written examination, and then practical testing. So, yeah, you had to qualify. And the quality of our training was good. I think about 99% of all our students, they qualified. And we saw the result of that in the performance of our artillery during the Angolan Bush War. We were excellent in all respects. And
Yeah.
this is where it came from. Hard work through the years and diligence and to be serious about what we were doing. We were not mucking around and taking shortcuts. And the discipline was good. So I remained very, very happy with what I personally have experienced in my career, with specific reference to my career in the artillery. It has been a wonderful, wonderful part of my life. And till the day that I will lay down my head, I will remain loyal to what we have done and what we have experienced. Of course, politically wise, everything has changed, but what I have in my mind is what we have done prior to 1994 and what we have achieved. I have no inkling to establish what the standard of training today is. We are, in any case, not very welcome there in any case. So we are talking about the days prior to 1994, mainly, chiefly.
General, thank you so much for this lecture. We really appreciate you. We're really grateful that General Viljoen, in the form of a colonel in those days, got hold of you for the artillery branch. I always wondered about him, how he became the chief of a defense force and chief of the army as an artillery man. I know at some stage the artillery people were very, very popular, but those were quite a long time ago under Napoleon and those type of people, and then with the First World War. I would have expected an armor officer actually to be in command of the South African Army. Perhaps we can speak about that at a later stage, because we do admire General Viljoen very, very much indeed. Rest in peace, sir. And so thank you so much once again, and I'm sure we're going to have other episodes of artillery branch as well. So God bless, and till we meet again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to receive notifications.